Is it going?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of the things I haven't mentioned before, which I should have, so many of the things that I talked about are sort of mixed up, but the basic nature of God as we know it, and as He is, the first, in the Urantia book, God is first of all, before He is anything else. He is what we call the I Am. The I Am is is mentioned in the Old Testament. Moses asked God how He is to be named. And the Jews were very sensitive about this. The Hebrews were very sensitive about this in the very beginning. Because there were so many names for gods. They were named, all the gods around had various names, as we know. Coming out of the very early days when they had no real understanding of God at all. They knew there was a great power around that must have organized things to have all of their activities work out, you know, the way they did, and that was oftentimes very uncomfortable, to say the least, for them, and sometimes disastrous. And so they were struggled in many of the thousands of years before Jesus' time. They struggled with this because they knew there was power out there. They could sense it. That was part of their nature as they evolved. And they struggled to find out what it was, and they couldn't understand it because the gods they had, they didn't know anything about them, and they let them down time after time after time, and they never really knew if they got some good information from them. So Jesus, when He came, and He decided after His baptism, He went up on Mount Hermon. And there's where He studied what His future ministry would be. The Bible has Him going up on the top of Mount Hermon before He was baptized. And that's where He's supposed to have made these decisions. But they got Him backwards. The temptation came before He was baptized. His plans came, well, during His baptism, you know, God spoke and in essence said He was His Son and He was with whom He was well pleased. And that was, as the Urantia book explains, was a release of His time that He was to spend on this planet. He could have gone home at any time then, after that. It was a release from the challenge, from the purpose and intent of His coming to this planet. Well, after that, He was baptized, and then He was free to do His own thing. That is, to minister to people, plan His life, and do what He wanted to do. And He went up to Mount Hermon that time also, after His baptism, after the temptation which came before the baptism. Well, anyway, we don't know what he did exactly and how He planned things out. Of course, it's not given. But he talked to His Father for an extensive time, and He finally planned what His ministry was going to be like. And aside from the experiences He wanted to live out the existence of His Father's nature and being. Now, His nature was a spirit nature. And the Urantia book speaks about His nature as the I Am, from that little story of which it comes from Moses and asking His name. He said, "I am that I am," in answer to that question. And the Hebrews, either before or after all of this, I don't know when it happened, but they were very sensitive about calling God by a name. It was sort of idolatrous, I think they thought. I'm not sure how they took it, but it seems like that might be reasonable. And so the I Am is known, is the Spirit of God. And it's given in the Urantia book that was the first, as God created, not created himself, but was created or understood he was created or whatever happened, however that original creation that was being it occurred as the I Am. And it represented the meanings and values of everything he was to do. It had to be done out of those meanings and values. That's not that it didn't explain how they were to be done. It's just that they were to be done. The Urantia book says that the I Am signifies that God can be only as he is. He can never be other than what he is. So he can never be other than kind and generous and loving, or all loving, compassionate, and forgiveness, as we say. And he can never be other than, no, I won't say that. I'm not sure about whether the omnis come in there. We know he's always omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscience. That is, he knew all, had all power, and could be any place and every place, all at the same time. And that's another remarkable aspect of his being, which is very important to us, because he's always within all of us, and he's always connected with everything that's going on. So anyway, that I didn't mention earlier before. But when it came to his creation, to human creation, when he was on earth, Jesus had two powers. He had all of the nature of the I Am, which controlled the meanings and values of everything he did. But he also had the power to do, and that's the second aspect of God. It's his power to act and have experience. And those two are the main aspects of God, although they're not. There are some others we must mention here. Human beings, when they started on the planet, when they were created on the planet, I'll mention that whole thing, that whole business of how they came to be, as is presented in the Urantia book, maybe a little bit later here. But those human beings had an innate sense of spirit. And I think their innate sense of spirit is really an explanation, serves as an explanation, as a argument for the existence of God. Because those two aspects of God are who God is. We're well aware that we have free will and we can do what we want. So our experience appears, from that point of view alone, that we can do anything. We just have that free will to do what we want, and we do. That is given to us, that free will. But that's another point. Aside from the fact that we know we have experience, and that's not a particular argument for the existence of God. But when you combine that with the I Am, we have two experiences, two aspects of our experiences. We have the external experience of what happens if we fall in the river. We know it, and that's an experience. But we also have a sense of the meanings and values. We think about, or at least I always did, I wondered, why did that happen? You know, what does that mean about my existence? And so we struggle for the meaning of it, and we also have feelings about it, of course. I mean, if it's unpleasant or pleasant or whatever. And so we're more than just an entity that can do things and have things happen to them, be active. We're more than just something that's active. And that activity is the basic Spirit of God, which is our feelings, come through our feelings. So if we have feelings about the meanings and values of what we do, those feelings are our indication to us that we are more than just an actor, that is a creature that acts. And I take that to mean that we're something more than that, and that we are human, and that we are connected to the meanings and values that we think about or worry about. Now I could go on with Jesus's go on with the options that God has in His actions and His experience. First of all, God has to conform to the I am. He can be no other than what he is, and He decided. Well, we think He decided if He had that opportunity or however He was created. But at least He functions as a person who made a decision to be to have His being represent certain meanings and values. He can act out of that. Of course, He acts through His capacity to envision, that is, through His dreams. These dreams are within Him. I mean, the subject matter of His dreams are entirely within Himself. He doesn't follow laws, and He doesn't, laws that pre-exist Him. He doesn't follow laws within Himself. He simply is. And He is according to His nature, His Spirit. So He doesn't have to have rules, logic, intellect. He just has to have Spirit and this capacity to act, because His Spirit will guide Him in His actions. So God can create out of His Spirit, but He can also create outside His Spirit. Now, the difference is that if He creates outside His Spirit, His creations must correspond to His Spirit. But if He creates just out of His creative capacities to envision and act upon it, that we say eventuate, why then He can do many actions. He can create the universe, because the universe does not depend upon or does not challenge or cause Him to consider the I am. So we have the creation story and the beginning in Genesis, which starts from a void. I think one of those creation stories begins with the existence of a void, and that's their term for something which we take to mean a vacuum, that is space, and space is a vacuum. The Urantia book indicates that God does not function in space. He functions outside of space, like a void. And He functions outside of space in His creations, and He can use just His creative power. He can envision what He wants. It will be instantaneously carried out. There will be no cause and effect that affects us, that is, in our finite reality that we live in. But outside finite reality, there is no space even. So God functions as Himself, as a creator, from outside space. He has surrogates of many kinds that function in space. And they are beings, many of them are just like us. They know God exists. They learn to act within His being as the I am, and they function as according to the task that they were created for. Many of them didn't go through birth and death, not like us. Us and all the others on other of these planets, like ours or similar to ours, or even different from ours, because there's many ways to create human beings in a physical sense. And God fits them to the environment of the planet. As soon as he receives the information that a planet can have is inhabitable by beings, by willful beings like us, why then that begins. And I'll talk about that later. But anyway, God creates out of these, on these planets, out of his being, as a creator, he creates the reality that we're in, the finite reality of the Master Universe, which is the name of the whole universe that functions outside of his reality. So when we create, why, we are expected to and intended to be, although we're not expected immediately. We're not born to function the way God does, out of the I am. We have to come to that. We have to come to that through some experience. The other beings who were created, they were created to know God easily. I mean, God was, in their experience, in their world, very apparent in their existence. And they did not have to hunt for God, figure out who he is, how he functions, what he's like. They knew that. They're given that immediately. They're born to it, and everybody knows it. But they're free will beings. They can reject it, and they do occasionally. One such rejection is caused all the difficulty for the human race, and that was the rebellion that took place in his world. In our world, well, I have to go back. When our world was created and human beings were finally created, administrators and developers of the world beyond us were sent here to teach us about their world and about God. And for a very long time, for 300,000 years after the first human beings came, they had a school that ran here, and it was a school that nobody ever failed. It was they had 50 million people on the planet when that happened. They were all primitive people, and but they had all of the mind of the human being and capabilities. And so they very slowly taught them. And they taught them about God's world. They taught them about proper action. Are we coming to the end?
1 minute.
1 minute.
And
Okay.
40 seconds.
They taught the people that way until a rebellion occurred off-world. We were not sinners before at any time. Sin came to us from off-world. And in the nature of the Lucifer rebellion, which is a long story, it's unknown to human beings, largely because we had no reading and writing, no ways of communicating on paper and carrying through the experiences of the past. We didn't have any kind of, well, we did have, but it was lost in the rebellion, in the course of the rebellion. We did have primitive writing, but it's all gone. It disappeared. And for 160,000 years, no, 200,000 years, down to Jesus' time, we suffered through that rebellion, and we're still in the aftermath of it. And we weren't initially sinners. We didn't know what sin was in the first place, and we were gradually being taught. And the rebellion taught us what sin was. And we were unable to resist it because we didn't understand God. Okay, well, I guess I better stop there then.